evening, maybe even morning to those of you that are joining us for this second session of The Art of the Possible, Building Data Strategy for Greater Mission Impact. My name is Kevin Mulhall. I'm a Senior Technical Program Manager for the Microsoft partnership here at TechSoup. In this session, as in the previous one, we are graciously joined by a couple of individuals from a very good partner of ours, Tech Impact, Ryan, Darnish, and Matt. Today's session will be recorded. The slide deck will also be later made available to those that have registered for this event. It will be provided in the coming days. As a courtesy to those that are in attendance, we have disabled the cameras in order that we could focus on the speakers themselves. And we will be muting the attendees as well until we open the floor for Q&A, at which point in time we encourage you. There is a hand raising feature in here, but if you simply wish to come off of mute, we're obviously open to that as well, because the more questions, the better. There are two areas in which you could, of course, ask questions. Within chat, Q&A is enabled, but I, as somebody who attends a ton of these, also know that sometimes it's a little bit easier just to toss it into chat. If you are asking a question in chat, if you could please start with the letter Q, and then preface your question. It'll make it a little bit easier to filter through, especially if this is a more active session. And as I mentioned, we will have folks on mute. And then, of course, when Q&A does kick up, we would love to hear your voices and asking questions, because this session really is all about you and understanding what's capable here with Azure AI. Your display name may or may not appear based on the session recording and your engagement and involvement. So for those of you that may not be comfortable with that, that's something also to consider. The next round of this session series is going to be on December 2nd. As well, specifically how to turn vision into action and build a data-driven nonprofit. So with that, I am going to go on mute, and I am going to go off camera and turn it over to the wonderful team at Tech Impact.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin. Really appreciate the introduction, and can't believe this is our third time through doing this already. We've gotten a lot of great feedback so far and are really excited to continue the conversation with you all. So if you're not familiar with us at Tech Impact is a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits use technology to advance their social impact. We work with nonprofits across the United States and beyond, and do a lot of different things, from full spectrum nonprofit tech services. We're a managed services partner for about 400 organizations around the country. We provide education and webinars like this right now, and then we're actually a workforce development provider ourselves. My name's Ryan Harrington, and I lead our data lab team. So our team is entirely focused in on how do we help nonprofits use data more effectively to advance their missions. And that's everything from, are you collecting the right data? Are you storing it the right way? Do you have the reports you need to make data-driven decisions? Are you thinking about more advanced analytics? And of course, top of mind now, are you thinking about artificial intelligence as well? My background is as a data scientist, and I'm really excited to be able to work with a whole bunch of other folks on our team who also do data work. And I'll pass it over to Darnish and Matt to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Darnish, and I'm the lead data engineer at Tech Impact. I specialize in designing and building data infrastructures that power business intelligence and analytics. I'm passionate about leveraging cloud platforms like Azure, Fabric to enable data-driven decision-making. I'll pass it over to Matt.
My name is Matt, and I'm an application developer at Tech Impact. I specialize in application data, application integrations, customizations, and automation. And I especially love being able to see all the really crazy cool ways that nonprofits drive their impact with their organizations and how we can help with that. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you both. You'll hear from Matt and Darnish a little bit more throughout today's conversation. So just as some housekeeping in terms of how we're going to be operating, we're really excited to talk about the value of data and data strategies in particular. So as we're going through today, we're going to talk through why does this matter? And what we really think is what's helpful for folks is just even understanding what's possible in the first place. There's a lot that you can do with data. And so understanding the types of analyses you might want to do really sets you up strongly. If you don't know what you want to be doing long term, it's impossible to build the infrastructure that you need in a thoughtful way before that. Of course, we're going to spend some time as part of that thinking about artificial intelligence. I feel really confident that all of you have played with that in some form at this point, whether it's Copilot or some other tool, but likely from like a traditional productivity sense. So we want to help give you some education about some of the other things that you could be doing with AI, even if it's not immediately applicable to you today. Once again, it's important to dream and understand what you could do. And then from there, we'll spend some time talking about what actually enables that work from a strategy perspective and some of the things that you should be thinking about from there. I'll be leading most of the conversation, but then Darnish and Matt will pop in specifically to lead some demos of the work along the way as well, so that you can see some key examples of how this might be used in practice wherever you are in your journey. So let's get started with that and zero in on why do data strategies even matter in the first place? Why should you be investing in this? We know that nonprofits are always dealing with evaluating and understanding how to deploy their resources as effectively as possible. And making the decision to invest in data strategy means that you're potentially pulling resources from other places. So why might you do that? And I think it comes down to 4 major points. The first is actually, I think of data as the absolute ultimate resource optimizer. If you have limited resources and you're trying to figure out how to extend what you can do more with less, you need to be able to optimize that. And you can't optimize those things without a strong data strategy and without the infrastructure backbone to make that possible in the first place. There's some real added benefits from the communities that you're working with perspective, though, as well. One that I think about a lot is that being thoughtful and transparent with your data is something that really builds trust with the communities and the constituencies that you serve. And so being able to be very thoughtful and understanding about the data that you have, how you're deploying it, who you're using it with, knowing that your data is correct is something that makes your community members believe in your work a little bit more. It is a trust building exercise. It of course allows you to improve your decision-making capacity. If you don't know what the current state of your organization looks like, you can't make decisions about the future state of what it's going to look like. If you don't know how many programs you're meeting, what your donors look like, any of those types of things, you're going to have a bad time. And of course, all of these things are tools that allow you to advance your mission. I don't know what all of your individual missions are, but it's really important work, whatever it is. And data is a tool that is going to let you do that really effectively. So we're excited to talk about how you can do that. Now, of course, we're happy to partner with Microsoft on this work, and Microsoft has so many tools in its arsenal that enable you and your organizations to use data effectively, and they're tools that you can build a data strategy on top of and being thoughtful about. Over the course of the 2 sessions today and on December 2nd, we're going to highlight 4 of them: Microsoft Fabric, Azure AI Foundry, Azure Synapse Analytics, and Microsoft Purview. These are all great tools, and they range in terms of their complexity from tools that maybe someone a little bit past a beginner to someone further on in their data maturity could use. And to call it out, there are a ton of tools in the Microsoft ecosystem that are going to meet you where you're at in your particular data journey. So even though we're highlighting these 4, in some of the demos, you might feel that the demos are a little too complex for where you are right now. I want you to focus in more specifically on the what's possible piece of it, and we can always align the tool to your specific need. So don't get too caught up on that as we're going. In today's conversation, we're going to focus in on 2 of these, specifically Microsoft Fabric and Azure AI Foundry. Like we said, we're zeroing in today on what is possible in the first place. And so those tools in particular are going to help with the analytics and the AI tools that might be meaningful for your organization. And so with that in mind, let's actually start thinking about what is possible with data. The way that I think about this is it's helpful to get an understanding of the types of analyses that you can actually perform in the first place. I think for a lot of folks, data becomes this magic four-letter word, but actually there's some real disciplines inside of it. And just simply knowing the key types of questions that you can ask are going to allow you to dream for your own organization. And you might even, as I'm going through this, I'll give you some very specific examples. Think about how these types of questions apply to the work that you have as we go through it. Typical data analyses fall into four key buckets. And so as we're going through this, I'll tell you what the analysis is, the key type of question that you might ask for it. And then over the course of most of the next two sessions, we're going to tie this back to the idea of donor and development data. It could obviously be applied to anything else, program data, operations data, whatever makes sense in your particular organization's wheelhouse. But donors are a pretty common thing, so we use that as our example here. And it is, of course, all completely made up data that you'll be seeing along the way. So the big one to start with is the idea of descriptive analytics. And descriptive analytics, I think of as being the really basic analytics, the stuff you were probably exposed to when you were in like 8th grade and you were taking an 8th grade math class and you learned about mean and median and mode and range. Those are all analytics that are descriptive of the work that you're doing. They are the building blocks, and they help you answer questions like, what have we done in the past? For any organization that's looking to build a data strategy, I always recommend that having a really strong understanding of what you've done in the past and up through the present is something that you keep top of mind. You can't measure where you want to go if you can't measure where you were before. You are familiar with these, and this is the typical type of data that most people are exposed to in day-to-day life. So pulling it down into this idea of understanding our donors and building some models and doing some data work around that, here's some examples you might see. Certainly a lot of these basic types of graphs, bar charts and line charts and histograms or just simple KPIs. So we're going to, throughout the session, look at these four fake data sources. So if you have past donation history about the people who are funding you or the organizations who are funding you, you might be tracking what your donations have looked like year over year, doing simple sums or simple means, things like that. You might be an event-driven organization, and so you have the hypothesis that the more events that people in your network are going to, the more likely that is to convert them into a donor, or get them onto the pathway to being a donor at least. So you might track event attendance. And so same thing, simple counts of this year over year are a great example of descriptive analytics. You might engage with the people who you're looking to convert into donors via email. And so simple descriptive analytics there are capturing things like click-through rates and seeing the distributions of those click-through rates. And potentially you're augmenting, which is another really important concept you might think of, your donor data. So you know who your donors are, and you want to get a better understanding of their world outside of your organization. Maybe you're augmenting that by seeing income or where they live or other characteristics of who they are. And you could just capture that as same thing, a simple average across the board. You probably have data like this for your organization, and that's a great starting point. A key question we'll talk about later, in fact, in the next session, is how do you make sure you feel really confident about that information? And how do you have the governance over top of it so that you feel good about the information that you're presenting back? So that's the most basic level of analytics, descriptive, and we're going to keep pushing that forward a little bit. The next thing is diagnostic. And now this is asking the question, not just what were the past results, but why have we seen the past results? So they're asking more complex questions, the types of questions you might have seen in like a basic statistics class, potentially. You're getting into the realm of correlations and some maybe simple regressions along the way to be able to connect the dots between a couple of different data points. If we were to build upon the same metrics we looked at before, past donation history, event attendance, engagement with emails, and income data, you can see how the types of questions we might ask for each of those evolves. So in terms of past donation history, you might be asking a question, a diagnostic question, like, does the amount an individual gave last year impact whether they give this year? So I'd want to go compare those two and see, is there a relationship between them that I can leverage to make a better informed decision? In terms of event attendance, very similar. Do the number of events an individual attended last year impact whether they give this year? So maybe you see a relationship that the more events someone attends, the more likely that person is to give, and that might impact your strategy. Does the average click-through rate of an individual over the past year impact whether they give this year? Does the income level of the individual impact whether they give this year? All of these are pretty basic types of questions, but being rigorous about how you ask them and thoughtful about how you ask them allows you to make more important decisions for your organization. And so pushing from descriptive up to diagnostic gives you a better handle on those things. We can push it forward a little bit. I'm going to spend more time on this section. So this is where data starts to get much more interesting. It's not just about asking and understanding what happened in the past. It's about using that data to predict what will happen in the future. So predictive analytics is, for a long time, what everyone called AI. That's evolved over time, of course. This can be really simple statistical techniques all the way up through much more advanced machine learning types of questions. And your organization may or may not be ready for those types of things, but still understanding that it's possible is really helpful. Predictive analytics can be broken up into a couple of different subclasses. And we're going to highlight those and give you an example of each one. The two basic high-level ideas you need to know about are the idea of supervised and unsupervised learning. All that means when I'm thinking about supervised data, it just means that I have historical data with a label associated with it. So for example, if I'm trying to predict whether or not a person is going to donate again this year, my historical data would include for each year whether or not that individual person donated. On the other hand, unsupervised learning doesn't necessarily have that label, which means that I have to be a little bit more creative in terms about how I'm doing things, and I'm a little more limited in terms of what I can do. But this can be really, really useful. So normally we're capturing patterns about people and using those as groupings in some way, just as an example. More interesting for you, and what you probably want to actually remember here, are the different types of questions that you can actually ask. So a common type of supervised learning that you might complete is called regression. And all that you have to remember for this is predictive analytics allows you to predict a numerical value. So a number from negative infinity to positive infinity, or bound by whatever is meaningful in this particular case. So can I predict a numerical value? When I'm thinking about our donor model, you might use all that same data that we had before. So for every single person who has donated, or maybe who has not donated in your organization, I'd use the past donation history, the event attendance, the engagement with emails, and the income data. And I would also have all the past data about how much each of those people gave. And in an ideal state, I could combine all of those independent variables, which are the top ones, donation history, attendance, emails, and income. And I would use those to predict my dependent variable, which in this case is how much that person gave. And this could be really useful from a planning perspective. Let's say that you have 1,000 individual donors, and you want to go figure out how much do we think each one of those people is going to give for the next year so you can budget appropriately. You might build a simple model that takes all of this past information and tries to make a prediction about how much each one of those people would give for you, which can really help you future-proof and be thoughtful from a budgeting perspective. You can also do classification work. So classification, instead of trying to predict a number, I'm trying to predict a likelihood. So I'm trying to categorize things. Will it fit into this class or into this other class? The example I'd show in a second is, can we predict whether or not a person is likely to donate? So there's a lot of reasons you might want to do something like that. We could use the same type of independent variables, your donation history, attendance, email engagement, and income data. But this time around, for each person, I want to predict, are they likely to donate or not? And instead of forcing it into those two categories, what we actually do is assign them a likelihood to donate. So something between 0% and 100%. By doing that, what you'd be able to do is, let's say you identify a person who is going to churn, meaning they have been a donor, and your model is identifying that they're going to stop donating to you. That gives you the opportunity to put interventions into place. So anyone who is going to convert to not donating, perhaps you need to schedule a one-on-one, like a phone follow-up with them, or invite them to a certain event, or some type of engagement activity. But this gives you, this particular type of model, predicting likelihood, gives you the nuanced data that you need in order to make that prediction successfully. Just to drill this home, this is a good example to think about labeled data and what that might actually look like in practice. So you can see in this very fake data set of these very real donors that for each person, we have the corresponding information for them. And we likely had to pull data from a lot of different data sources to make this happen. Your donation data probably lives in a different system than your event participation data, which probably lives in a different system than your email data, which probably lives in a different system from your income data. And we're going to talk about that in the next session on December 2nd. But when we do that, we're able to say, hey, Mickey Mouse donated $200 last year. They didn't go to any events. They had a 5% click-through rate, and their income last year was $200,000. The mouse probably made more than that. We also know that they did donate this year, and I could do that for every single one of the individuals in my data set. The key is that I know this past labeled historical data, which lets me make that prediction. If I didn't have this data, if I didn't have this last column, I couldn't make the prediction because I wouldn't have any past data to build upon. So now when I have new people come in, Ash Ketchum and Velma Dinkley, I don't know if they're going to donate this year, but I do know all this other information about them. And I can now use my model to assign them a likelihood. Maybe Ash Ketchum has a 20% chance of donating, and Velma Dinkley has a 75% chance of donating. If I have limited resources, I'm going to go invest in reaching out to Ash Ketchum, getting an intervention for them to increase their likelihood of becoming a donor. So that's the value of something like a classification model. Moving on a little bit, thinking about some of the unsupervised types of work we might do. These are going to be data sets where I don't have that dependent variable. I don't know what the outcome is, but they can still be really useful for me. I can use that data to find patterns that I might not have already known about. For example, I might think about the idea of clustering. And clustering asks the question of, can I find common groups? Now, people can do that, but we might miss things, particularly when our data gets more and more complex. So here's what that might look like. I have the same type of data, past donation history, event attendance, engagement with emails, and this time I might also use frequency of giving. These are all behavioral indicators about the different people that we want to look at. And my goal is to go try to cluster them, to put them into groups so that I can go have different types of campaigns associated with them. I might take different actions based upon the different behaviors that someone is exhibiting. And the problem is, I don't know what types of groups I want. So a clustering algorithm is going to break your individuals up, or whatever else your unit of measurement is, into groups based upon what the data looks like. It's a little bit of an art on top of being a science. So it's not going to spit out and give you these names. Oftentimes it's going to say, hey, these people are in this group, and the typical person in this group has these types of behaviors. And then after the fact, people give them nice names because it's easier to work with. In this case, it might break people up into a group that's loyal supporters, big spenders, new and curious, or at risk. So let's go take a look at this fake data set and see what that could look like in practice. So you can see it's all the same fake people that we had before. There's differences in how they donate and how they attend events and how they click through and what their income looks like. And the model is going to take this type of data with no label attached to it in our training data, and we're going to add a label to make it convenient for us to look at and to parse through the data and make key decisions. So you can see that it might split it up into groups like Mickey Mouse and Bruce Wayne are big spenders. And that might have to do with how much they donated and what their income looked like. But they also are going to less events, notably. How I would engage with a person like that is going to be fundamentally different than someone like our loyal supporters. They make some moderate income. They are going to events, and they did give a smaller amount of money. They might be more willing to give money in a different kind of way. They might need a different engagement strategy. I, of course, have folks like Patrick Starr. We might call them at risk. They make less money. They're engaged to some extent. And so we need to just treat them differently. They might not have the bandwidth to give in the same way that they did before. And we have these other folks, Peter Parker, Velma Dinkley, who are new and curious. They're going to a lot of events. They're engaging a lot with our emails, and we might need to treat them in their own way. But just having the data and using an algorithm parse through this for us, a predictive model, allows us to make more nuanced choices than we would be able to before. And of course, I'm dramatically simplifying this. In a typical instance, you'd have a lot more pieces of data and a lot more records, and it wouldn't be quite as clear, and the model would help you navigate that. And the last one to call out is this idea of association. It's asked the question of what items go together. In fact, this is often called market basket analysis. The really simple way you could think about this, if you go to the grocery store and you were to buy peanut butter, what else are you likely to buy that goes with it? Jelly. If you bought eggs, you might be likely to buy milk. And you can think of a million other examples of this. In your day-to-day life, where you've seen this before, is if any of you use Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime, or you bought something on Amazon and they make a recommendation for you, it's a similar type of model going on in the background. Because you read this book, because you watched this show, because you did this thing, what else are you likely to be interested in? That's called association mining or association modeling. And so you might use this now to discover some donor behavior patterns that you can use advantageously to you. So for example, you might see that donors who attend certain types of volunteer events likely donate within 7 days of attending those. And you can use that to lift patterns along those lines. Or donors who respond to year-end emails are likely to give at Giving Tuesday. And these are very contrived examples, of course, but you could imagine how you could leverage understanding behavior patterns to predict the next likely thing someone is able to do and make that recommendation to them. And you can use that for your own planning or to harvest more donors or whatever else it might be. So all very, very powerful techniques. So like I said, you don't need to remember the specific names of those, regression, classification, clustering, and association. What I want you to remember are the types of questions you can answer. Can I predict a number? Can I predict a likelihood? Can I group things? And can I find associations between things? And think about where those instances would be helpful within your own organization to make better data-driven choices. The last thing that I want to highlight here is the idea of prescriptive analytics. So that pushes this idea one step further. Descriptive and diagnostic about understanding the past and the present. Predictive is about making a prediction about the future. And prescriptive is, now that I have the prediction about the future, how do I take action on it? How do I automate the action on it even more specifically? So just to look at an example of that, how does data help you take action? One example could be you've built a predictive model looking at donor history and engagement, and you might be using that model to find the best time and method to reach out. So we know that Sarah like we have her behavior patterns here. We can use the data to go figure out like it's best if we reach out to Sarah at this time for this amount of money. And that could lead to some kind of automated message that is tailored to her, asking for an amount of money that makes sense to ask her. Well, automate decision making. So it can be a very, very powerful technique. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how we could use this in practice. I'm going to pass it over to Darnish in a second to demo Microsoft Fabric, which is a tool from Microsoft that allows you to leverage some of these concepts in terms of machine learning and forecasting. Some of what you'll see that it might look intimidating for you, but something to keep in mind is that Fabric is helping you do some of this work. And you'll be able to watch the screen recording of it separately as well when you get the PowerPoints. So let me pass it over to Darnish.
Thanks, Ryan. Today I'm going to show you a quick demo on Fabric's machine learning capabilities. So I'm really excited to introduce you all to Microsoft Fabric. Over the past few years, Fabric has quickly become one of the most talked tools in the data space, mainly because it's much easier to work with data and it makes data more accessible. Think of Fabric as a one-stop shop for everything related to your organization's data. Instead of juggling between multiple systems, one for storing and one for analyzing and yet another for creating reports, Fabric brings everything in a single seamless platform. The best part is it's designed to be user-friendly. You don't have to be a technical expert to benefit from it. Fabric helps organizations like yours to connect between different data sources, organize data in one place, and turn it into clear insights that you can make that you can use to make better decisions. Today, we will focus on Fabric's machine learning and analytics capabilities. Let's walk through a real-world example to see how Fabric can help. Imagine you are a nonprofit leader and you're responsible for planning fundraising campaigns. And part of your job is to set realistic deadlines, realistic donation targets. So one of the questions you might end up being asked is, how much funding are we likely to raise in the future? So that's where forecasting comes in. Forecasting is a type of predictive analytics. It's a subcategory of regression, the type of analytics that Ryan was talking about. So first, we need to make sure we have the data. So for the purpose of the demo, we have curated a sample data set. We have 3 campaigns, annual fund, education drive, and health and wellness. And the data set is curated for over a period of 2014 to 2024. And you could see some other key indicators like emails sent, social media views, website visits, and so on. And the last column is the donation amount. So for all these campaigns, we have aggregated the donation amount monthly, and that's like the total sum of the donations received for the campaigns. So now that we have data cleaned and ready, the next step is to set up the AutoML. So Fabric has this wizard to set up the configurations for the AutoML feature. So the first step is to connect to the data source. So the data that we saw is being linked. And the type of ML task we are looking for is a forecasting model. And it has 2 options, either a quick prototype or a best fit model. And then it asks a few more questions like, what is the prediction column that you would like to predict. And in our case, it's the donation amount. And we can choose the length we would like to predict. So I have given like 18 months. And it asks few more details. And once it's done, it reviews all the information. And it creates the ML notebook for you. Moving to the next. Yep. So this is the automated ML model notebook. So it creates all the scripts and the steps based on the input and the data given to it. So it basically has some five high-level steps. It loads the data, it generates features, and it uses AutoML to find best models, and it saves the prediction results. So all these code is generated for you using the Fabric's AutoML capabilities. And here you could see the different experiments it ran on the data. So each child 0, 1, 2, 3 are the different experiments. So it basically tries different hyperparameters, and it tries different models like XGBoost and transformers and other cool ML algorithms. And it gives you the best model it has based on the evaluation metrics. And once we have the best model, it saves the prediction. So the next 18 months prediction results are getting saved back to the SQL table. And once we have the predictions results, we can visualize it in the Power BI. So Power BI is a great tool for data visualizations and analytics. Here you could see like a line chart. The one on the left, the blue line is like the historical data from our data set. So from 2014 to 2024, it's the past data, and the black line you see is the forecasted result that the model has produced. And you could also see the gray shaded region. That's what we call it as confidence interval. So it has like an upper and lower bound. So when it comes to prediction, it's all probabilistic. So it gives you the highest likelihood number, but also it gives you the range in which it thinks the future numbers would look like. And also we have the campaigns. So we can slice it by, we can select the particular campaign you would like to take a look, and we can see the prediction for those particular campaign. So yeah, Fabric is really powerful. So when you join us for the next webinar on December 2nd, we'll talk more on the data infrastructure side. I will pass it back to Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darnish. So a couple things I just want to quickly highlight about what Darnish was showing. Certainly, like, I'm making a guess about folks on the call that you might not have a background in coding or in data science or software development. And the great thing about Fabric is it guided you through that process so that you don't necessarily have to have the expertise in software development or have to have the expertise as a data scientist to be able to take advantage of building a predictive model. And that can be really, really valuable. As a data scientist, what I always recommend, it's a great thing to have that person on your team or as a partner for you to make sure you're doing the right thing. Absolutely. But that's a big, big value add that you're able to do that. So, big fan. Fabric really helps make that easier and more accessible for a typical nonprofit or typical organization more generally. So with that said, we spent a lot of time talking about more traditional analytics and helping you think about the types of questions that you could ask there. And that's phenomenal. What you might also want to think about, and what's top of mind for so many organizations today, is generative artificial intelligence. That's another key thing that your organization should be thinking about building around now so that you can build a data strategy that incorporates it and that allows your organization to do the most that it possibly can for who you're serving. So generative AI, obviously big buzzword. I think a key question is, how do we define that? How do we differentiate that from other types of analytics that exist? There are 4 key things that I always highlight that really separate generative AI from traditional analytics, traditional machine learning that powers a lot of the world around us. Those four things are: one, generative AI involves internet scale data. So we talked really briefly about the idea that we have to train the predictive models that we build. Generative AI is a predictive model. It's just that instead of using a few thousand records of data, we just used all of the data on the internet. And the big insight, and I'm mildly, but only mildly, exaggerating that, the big insight that companies building generative AI tools had is that if we feed models more and more and more data, they make more and more and more connections that we're able to leverage. That is a good and a bad thing. I don't know about you. I've spent some time on the internet. It's a scary place. That means that there can be, and we've all experienced this before, some less savory things that might pop up into our models. And there's a lot of teams working to solve for that, to protect that, but it's always something that we need to keep in mind when we're using a generative AI tool. The other things have a lot to do with content. Different than the models we just talked about, the outputs there typically look like numbers, and they don't change very much. The output for generative AI models are content in a lot of different types of form, and it looks different. There's variability in creativity that comes with that every time. In fact, as you become a more advanced user, you can adjust how much creativity via adjusting something called temperature when you're working with a generative AI model. And the outputs can come in a lot of different varieties. Certainly, we're used to text. That's the primary way that I use it, but it might also be images or videos or whatever else you can imagine, 3D models, SQL, music, all kinds of different things. And even crazier, the outputs can look, they can be interspersed with each other. There's a lot of different ways that you can use generative AI. I most frequently use it to help me get past the blank page problem, to help me write a first draft of things so that I'm, take my outline of something and turn it into something a little bit nicer. You might also look at refining language. So this is my wife's preferred way of using this, helping make her emails a little bit less passive aggressive, a little bit more tailored to the moment. And certainly Microsoft has Copilot integrated into Outlook, so you can do things like that. You might use it to summarize. You might use it to ideate. You might use it to extract data. Our team has a huge project going on right now to do that for cancer-focused data, and lots and lots and lots of other ways to do it. So quickly, I'm going to talk you through how you might think about the evolution of your use of generative AI, starting with something relatively simple and then working your way through a couple of problems that you might have encountered and the solutions that help you address those things. So just really simply, I would imagine that most folks in this room are using a free or a paid tool. You can get so much out of a free tool, so you do have to be really thoughtful about what you're putting into that tool. The old adage goes, if you're not paying for it, you're the product, right? And so you have to be thoughtful about that. Copilot is a phenomenal tool. It's integrated by default into your Outlook, your Office 365 accounts, but at a lower tier. If you pay for a tool like Copilot, and there's nonprofit pricing at $25.50 per month per user paid annually, now all of a sudden the tool is going to be much smarter. It's going to be integrated inside of your productivity tools like Word or Outlook or Excel or whatever else you're using. And it's also going to come with the context of your files, specifically the files that you have access to. And it's going to keep your data secure inside of your organization's environment. It's something that's worth experimenting with and being thoughtful about that from a strategy perspective. Where are we going to start thinking about that? What's the most optimal use of those tools is really, really valuable. But even with that paid tool, sometimes you still might run into the problem of you need the outputs of your generative AI tools to reference accurate and up-to-date information, which is not always possible.
Right, Efron, thank you so much for the patience provided. So I do have your DJ.
All right. With that in mind, we often want that. I know that happens in our world a lot, where we just want the most up-to-date tool in front of us. And AI models they were trained, so they are typically accurate up to a certain point in time. or they might not know the specific information about what's going on in our own organization. And the way that you might solve this is a technique called RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. We're going to show you an example about this as it relates to donors in a couple of minutes. But just to give you a sense of how this works, we need to back up a little bit and think about how prompts typically work. Prompts are, of course, how you communicate with an AI tool, with a chatbot. You type your prompt in, and then you send it out to the tool. I'm representing that as bricks because they're a foundational model. Not going to go into that in super depth. And you get your output from there. RAG basically hijacks that idea. And instead what happens is when you type in your prompt, we set up a special database that we retrieve and augment the data from that special database. We drop it back into the prompt as additional context, and then it goes to our model and our output. And it can be a really, really, really valuable tool. So we're going to demo something called Azure AI Foundry. In the Microsoft world, Copilot's a phenomenal starting point. You might evolve to then using a tool like Copilot Studio, which lets you build some of your own tools. And then you might evolve from there a little bit further to Azure AI Foundry, which gives you even deeper access to some of these tools, which lets you do things like RAG. So I'm going to pass it over to Matt, who's going to talk about this in a little bit more depth, and let him take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, my name is Matt, and I'm going to be giving you a demo on Azure AI Search. And so first I want to talk about what it is. It's a tool that lets you search across a whole lot of different data sources all at once, kind of like what Ryan has been describing through this process. And for this particular demo, we're going to be showing how instead of having to manually open each data source and having to search through it specifically for what you're looking for, you can use plain English and use that RAG model like we were just talking about to get context-specific answers without needing to know the exact information that you're trying to get out of it. For the specific example that we're going to be demoing, we're going to be talking about documents related to securing funding and managing grant compliance. Maybe you're trying to juggle multiple different grant opportunities at once. And the first element of this that I want to show you and walk you through is the data collection screen. So you can see on this screen that we have multiple PDF documents, and these are all related to different grant requirements. This doesn't have to be PDFs. This could be web pages, APIs, log databases. It could be almost anything that you could possibly need to quickly try to parse through and get an answer using data. For our specific example, I'm going to pull open one of these and show you how that might apply, kind of a before and after snapshot. For this example, I'm trying to find some detailed budget rules and proposal requirements for this Merck grant application. I'm trying to find out the maximum admin overhead limit. And so you're going to see here in a second how I start trying to search through this document to find that very specific thing. And I'm going to use the word overhead to just try to find that specific item. I kind of play around with it a little bit here and I start searching for administrative, trying to kind of tweak it a little to get that piece of information that I need for my grant application, and I'm still not coming up with what I need. And this isn't just limited to this document. It's going to apply to all of this. So I want to be able to have that ability to kind of go through all of these in one fell swoop and have that flexibility to try to use the AI RAG model to find exactly what I need. So I'm going to go to the next screen where you kind of can start seeing the behind the curtain of how we're going to go do this. This screen is where you're actually going to pick the model that's used. It looks way more complicated than it is. These are pre-built into Azure. You certainly want to have a little bit of context, but it really is once you kind of know how some of this is working, you really are just kind of choosing the ones that you want to use. You're not having to be some big data science that you're going to have to design these from scratch. This is going to be like your smart librarian that's going to go through and read every little piece of detail in those documents, and it's going to start tagging all of those. This is going to be that RAG model, and it's going to logically parse that information so that it can then be used. In the next screen, this is the actual AI search that we're going to use, the indexer. And this is the tool that's going to go through that after it's all been tagged with that model. It's kind of like the table of contents that's going to allow us to go through and find exactly what we need using this model and this indexer. And so the last piece is where you're going to kind of pull all of these different building blocks together. And it's going to be called the chat playground screen. So this is where the magic happens. This is the interface where you can ask your questions using your natural language, and the AI is going to respond using the data that we've kind of indexed and gone through. This is like that super smart assistant that's going to be able to have all these moving parts to get you exactly what you need. So you're going to see in the lower left corner, I'm going to wait for it to catch up to me for a second here. In the lower left corner is going to be where we actually added our data sources. Right there, add your data. And so that's where we pointed back to those files that we had stored, all those PDF files. Once we have all these pieces lined up, you can see kind of in the upper left corner here, this is our model's instruction. And I kind of like to point this out that this is trial and error, right? I have a whole lot of information in here, and you can be really explicit about how you're phrasing this. You can use very plain language. Because it's fed into this model the way it is, it has the intelligence to be able to really understand what you're saying. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And you can use a lot of trial and error with this to really get the results that you're looking for. And you can kind of see in here, I even, I start asking different items that how I want it to spit out the information. At one point, I'm even telling it the tone that I want to use. You can literally put anything in here and customize exactly how you want it to come out. I'm waiting for it to get up to the tone part. Yeah, right. I told it to write a helpful guide, not be a bureaucratic reader. So you really have a lot of control in exactly what you're going to get out of this. Much like Copilot, just a lot more powerful. So now in the main screen, you can see I'm going to start telling it exactly what I want to look for. I'm going to ask that same question. I'm going to ask for the overhead limit for Merck's grant. And you can see that it even specifies in the parenthesis right there, the actual phrase I could have used was indirect cost if I knew, but you don't know what you don't know, right? But it narrows down on the 15% total budget. It gives me a reference to the exact spot in the document. Again, this is going to be pretty familiar to some of you that might have used similar processes in Copilot. It's just you have way more control on exactly what you can do. So I'm going to keep going. We're going to start asking other questions that are going to apply to other documents. I'm going to ask about submitting a letter of interest. This might be another requirement for my grant. It does a similar process where it's going to spit out the reference and it's going to give me all the specific information. And this is from a completely different file in that group of files. And so it really has that capability because of that RAG process to go through and go through all of these in one fell swoop. I'm going to ask another question here that actually is going to spit out multiple sources from multiple documents. And you can kind of see there it's citing how much funding we can request from a specific grant. It's pretty thorough. The last thing that I like to point out, again, in the upper left-hand corner, there's different ways that you can deploy this. Like obviously us as the admin, we went through and had to do all of this setup to make this work the way that it did. But in that little deploy window in the upper left, you can deploy it to teams. There's a lot of different ways that you can utilize this once you've set it up to have others in your organization to be able to use it. And for them, it's going to be a lot like Copilot. It's just going to be a prompt. And so you have a lot of control to be able to make this do some pretty valuable stuff for your organization. And I'll pass it back to Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. And so once again, just to highlight a couple of things here, Azure AI Foundry is a tool that lets you build upon how you've typically been using AI. It lets you use documents that you might not typically have had access to inside of your AI experience so you can reference them. And the great thing about something like AI search is that it's not as brittle. It instead, it doesn't understand the word overhead, but it understands words and concepts that are close to the idea of overhead, just going back to Matt's example, so that you can find things a little bit more easily. It's going to provide you references when you're doing that and citations so that you can be more confident in the answer, and reduce the idea of hallucinations. So it really dramatically helps with having up-to-date and accurate information. Now, another thing that we see people run into really frequently is that generative AI gives the chance to automate more things. So specifically, it helps you with more prescriptive tasks via this idea of agents and agentic AI. Agents are just simply automation that includes a generative AI element inside of it. A broader definition, and this is so broad, is that it's anything that perceives its environment and acts on it. And we'll talk a little bit in a second about what differentiates this type of automation from others, but it's a really, really key technology that's emerged. You've probably heard something about it over the past couple of years. It's really grown in prevalence. Interestingly, it's a pretty old idea. It actually came about in about 1995. It was first listed in Artificial Intelligence, a Modern Approach. So it's a 30-year-old concept, but the technology has just finally caught up to it today to allow us to be able to do this work. Now, I used to be a math teacher, so I think about things like this. I think about squares and rectangles. And if you all remember, squares and rectangles have a unique relationship between them. Think back to your 4th grade math. And that is that all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares. And that's how I think about the relationship between agents and automation. All agents are a form of automation, but not all automation are forms of agents. And specifically, what differentiates them is the idea that agents are non-deterministic and automation, generally speaking, traditional automation, is deterministic. Here's what I mean by that. When I say something's deterministic, that means that I'm using if-then logic in order to make those decisions. If this happens, then do this thing. Well, I can't always do that. There's a type of decision making where that just doesn't work anymore. And that's what non-deterministic automation looks like. It's things that require a little bit more nuance, that you can't perfectly capture all of the rules in nice, neat if-then statements or however else you're doing it. You need something that's a little bit more flexible and a little bit less brittle. And agents are the type of solution that lets you solve those things. When I think about agents, they come in a pretty wide variety. I'm using some language from Microsoft to help talk about this. I really like how they lay this out. On one hand, you have pretty simple agents. They're focused just on retrieval, and they work all the way up to more advanced agents that operate a little bit more autonomously. So here's an example of a retrieval-based agent. You might build a chatbot that's aware of donor information and then can answer questions about those donors for your team members. And you can actually build that pretty easily. As long as you have access to the data source about that information about your donors, you can connect it into a tool like Copilot Studio and then deploy that chatbot to everyone else on your team. Internally at Tech Impact, I actually did something like that for our HR information. So like a lot of other organizations, we have an intranet, we have an HR handbook, we have all the different policies about our benefits and what that looks like. So I took all of those data sources, I was able to dump them inside of Copilot Studio by making those direct connections, and then was able to simply deploy that agent so that anyone in the organization could use that and make it a little bit easier to find that information. Task-based agents are tools that allow you to automate things in a little bit of a different way. They tend to be triggered by some kind of external source, and then will use that trigger to go down an automation pathway. So for example, we might automate the generation of a donor thank you letter based upon the most recent donation, and we might want to reference how those people have engaged with the organization in the past. So like today we could automate, or without AI, we could automate generating a thank you letter, but it would be very like form-based, very fill-in-the-blank based. John Smith, thank you so much for donating $500. This is going to go really far to helping us with XYZ type of thing. Phenomenal. But what I can't do with more traditional automation tools is use the context of what that person has donated to before and customize what that thank you letter looks like. So in the new world of agentic AI, you might be able to do like, John Smith, thank you so much for donating $500. We love that in the past you've given to XYZ types of programs. These dollars are going to go really far to helping us continue those services. And now I've pulled in context about that person to make a more personalized donor thank you letter that is going to feel a little bit less like a form and a little bit more like an actual thoughtful outreach. Autonomous agents are going to be working on their own. So they're not necessarily triggered by some kind of action. Instead, they're kind of always working in the background. So in this case, perhaps to identify and engage with lapsed donors in order to re-engage them via some kind of personalized outreach. So they're kind of always working in the background. They're like an extra team member with a very, very specific task who's helping you do your work. Now, of course, outside of this donor idea, it can apply to a lot of different parts of your organization. At this year's Microsoft Nonprofit Summit, they gave these ideas a little bit more geared towards small business potentially, but you can imagine like it could apply across a lot of different places in your org. What I want you to be thinking of are those types of repetitive tasks that don't have simple if-then statement types of techniques that you could use to automate them. So you have to be a little more thoughtful. Just to give you another very clear picture of how we've done this at Tech Impact, and we've embraced this where we can in our organization. One, to be able to help us do our work more effectively, and two, to be able to serve more of our constituents, more of the nonprofit community better than we could today. One key example of this is that historically, we've had a product, a service that we've had around building nonprofit computer use policies, which is the world's least sexy but most important idea. So specifically, you as a nonprofit, I hope this is true for you, should have a computer use policy as part of the essential documents that you have to tell people how to protect sensitive data, ensure compliance, use technology responsibly, all those different kinds of things, which would probably include something about artificial intelligence in it as well. So historically, the way that we did that is this is a product that someone could book doing. And when they did that, they would go say, hey, I want to buy this product. We would end up getting a consult meeting together. We had an Excel template that we would then send to that person or that team to go fill out. A consultant on our team would then draft a policy for it, and we'd deliver that back to the organization. In total, it would cost someone on our team somewhere between 2 and 5 hours of work to do that. And that doesn't say anything about, you've all scheduled meetings, like how much back and forth time this takes. So it would take a few weeks to be able to get something like this done, right? From when they bought it, it would be, an hour or a week out to get the first meeting, and then a couple weeks out for someone to fill out the Excel file, and then another couple weeks or a week, whatever it is, for someone to draft the policy, etc. This was something that we could never automate before because there are too many differences in needs for organizations. So if you're a food bank in Delaware versus a legal aid association in California, like we can't capture all the different types of policies in a neat little box and have perfect if-then statements for all of them. There's logic we need to build in, but we couldn't capture everything. So it was always out of reach to automate in a traditional way. Agents allow us to capture some of that. So we took the opportunity to adjust the process at the same time that we added in the technology. So we reframed it. It's now something that you can actually, I'll give you the link for it in a second, but you would be able to go sign up on your own for it. You'd get an email back to you giving you a link to complete some educational content, and that'll help guide you through, like, here's what each part of this computer use policy means. As you're getting the educational content, you're simultaneously filling out a Qualtrics survey, which allowed us to capture the information in a little bit more of a structured way. From there, once you hit submit on completing the Qualtrics survey, it takes a few minutes for an updated computer use policy to make it back to you, delivered to you via email, and you actually get 2 documents. The first document that you get is a draft of the computer use policy, and the second document that you get is some annotations talking about how a traditional computer use policy was changed based upon your specific needs. If from there you need some additional consulting, that's an opportunity for you. So it did two things. One, for our team, while we have to maintain it, but on a day-to-day basis, or on a policy-to-policy basis, we don't have to spend time doing that. We did a lot of checking ahead of time to make sure that we feel good about it and kept a human in the loop up front, but every net new one that we're doing now doesn't require that. For the organizations who are completing it, they've reduced the back and forth time in order to get it. So instead, it takes them maybe an hour or two to go through the educational content and to fill out the Qualtrics survey, which is what they were basically doing before. And then they get it much faster. The other thing is, because of doing this, we were able to entirely eliminate the cost. So it used to cost a couple $100 for us to do this, just for consulting time. And we've actually made it free. It costs us 97 cents every time we do it. And we think that's worth it overall. We just think it's really important for people to have computer use policies. When I evaluate this against that framework I gave you, from simple retrieval to advanced autonomous agents, this fits in as a task. It's triggered every time someone runs Qualtrics and hits submit there, and then it ends up in your inbox after it goes through that process. If this is something that you're interested in, it's totally free. Like we said, you can go to techimpact.org/policy builder. This link will be in the deck for you, or we can also always drop it into chat. If you need a policy, I recommend doing it. I will call out for you. Sometimes the email goes to spam. So just look out for that email. That has nothing to do with the AI. That is all on email providers, not on us. So take a look there. So with that said, I want to show you a demo of how you might build an agent using Azure AI Foundry. I'm going to pass it back to Matt, who's going to talk you through that and walk you through a quick demo there. And we're going to do that in the context of writing donor thank you letters. So Matt, over to you.
I think I'm sharing the wrong screen. Sorry about that. 1 second. Always when you're live.
Hey, at least it wasn't embarrassing.
Right? No, I'm prepared. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Hello again. Again, my name is Matt, and I'm going to show you a demo on Azure AI Foundry. So this is going to kind of take up a little bit from where we left off on our last demo. One of the differences I like to highlight, Azure AI Search, is kind of the mechanics of the search itself. It's really good at parsing through data and using your context, where Foundry takes it to the next level, and you can actually take some action based on that information. And that's the differentiating factor, I think. It does a lot of the same things, but you can build that functionality to do things like sending the emails and doing all sorts of stuff. It's a very wide ocean on what you can actually do to design your agent functionality. And like Ryan said, we're going to give one simple, straightforward demo of exactly how you can use this. In this demo, I'm going to jump right back into our agent playground. I can never tell if it's actually running or not, or if I was just talking too fast. Catch up.
Matt, you could just click ahead on the bar.
Yeah, that's like, I always doubt it, but you know what I mean. I was talking really fast. Come on. Really? Okay. So this is our agent playground. Sorry about that, folks. I'll kind of call out some of the moving parts so that you can see how this is structured. So you can see where I named it, the Donor Appreciation Email Agent. And we chose our model. And again, those are models that are, there's a lot of models by default in Azure. You're just selecting which one you want to use. We talked about that in the prior demo. The instructions, this is going to be our key piece, just like the last one. This is where you're going to, again, modify and test as you go. Trial and error is a real thing, very important thing for this. If you've been watching our chat in the demo, we've been talking about that a little bit. I was very specific about what I told this agent I wanted it to do. That file that I'm pointing to right there, the knowledge area, So this is, I like to use this as an example. It's a file called a JSON file, which, again, as I said it before, sounds more complicated than it is. It's just another format, just like a CSV file or an Excel file. This is a very common file that large CRM systems and other automation systems use. The example that I like to use is exactly that. If someone has some big CRM system that doesn't have all sorts of AI bells and whistles, they might be able to go into that system and export a giant list of all their donor data. And something like a JSON or a CSV, those are all going to be common formats that you're just going to be able to hand to this type of a process to be able to parse through for you. And that's where we kind of start with our customized thank you letters, is with that giant set of donor information, kind of similar to what Darnish was showing before as well. And so some of the instructions that I went through, I'll kind of go through the nuances that we decided to try to kind of play with while we were going through this. We were telling it that we wanted to make sure that, don't email somebody that has an opt-out flagged. Maybe we want to do it for a specific time range. We want to do it for specific amounts. Like, you can really get creative with exactly what criteria you want to use for this type of a process. Since this was a demo, I didn't want it to, we obviously had sample data, and I wanted to just make sure without having to check that it wasn't going to go email some, John Doe at some email address by accident. So that was something else. I said, even though you might have some sample email addresses in here, only send it to me. Things like that. You can be real specific. I think while we were testing, we ran into a spot where it was emailing twice. So again, we came back and we said, hey, make sure that you're only emailing this once. You might have more than one person sending the thank you emails, and you want to make sure you can track who has sent one and who hasn't. So that's an item that you could throw in your instructions. These are all examples of the type of testing that you can do. You can really refine it and get exactly what you want. I think another criteria that I added, I started doing some formatting. I used some HTML spacing because if you've ever used Outlook, a lot of the emails will have HTML in them. But again, that's optional. You're going to see pretty quick when you start playing with it exactly what the emails look like, especially if you have it sending them to you first so that you can kind of just play around with it. The other thing that I added in here is, we've been talking about testing, going back and forth and testing. In my instructions, I actually told it to just spit out those sample letters into our chat. I want to visually look at it. I don't want to have to actually send them to myself. I want to be able to spot check it right from my window in my chat. So there's a lot of ways that you can even automate your own testing to make this process a little bit easier. And so I think we're pretty close to when I actually start using it. Did it? Fast forward a little bit. Wow, I think it actually stopped because of me. So I'm going to manually guide us through this to where I actually start asking it. Okay, so the first thing I asked it is, hey, what can you do for me? Because again, you might not be you're developing this to be able to use for yourself, but maybe you're gonna share this with other people in your organization. So you might want to have that kind of functionality. And it does a lot better job of telling me what it does than what my prompt, what my actually instructions were. It's a very user-friendly language that it uses. And again, just like before, you can control the tone of things like that. And so I think that I'm just going to go ahead and tell it to start firing off some processes here. I said, I asked it who donated in July 2025, right? And so it's going to go through and it's going to detail all those different things. It's going to take into account some of the factors of what I spelled out in my instructions. It's going to cite whether people were opt out. You can see it right there, whether they're skipped for emails. So it's going to try to kind of do a little bit of that sanity checking for me, just because it's nice and helpful like that. So I think that then I'm going to go ahead and tell it to just start processing some of these emails. I'm going to skip forward a hair. Okay, so I said, please draft some personalized emails. So it's going to go through it. And again, because I told it in my instructions that I wanted to see these before it actually sent them, it spits it out to the screen. I think I'm going to highlight here to kind of show you in the subject line how we have our customized, it's obviously sending it to me, but it has the customized information about the organization in here. It has the whatever they contributed to. I think that's also in my instructions. I was pretty specific. So it's very customized. You can really, dictate exactly what you want this personal touch in these emails to be. And then I think the next thing I do, it's kind of prompting me at the end there. It's asking me if I'm ready to proceed, basically. And so I think that's the next step where we're going to jump to right here. Go for it. Send away. And again, think creatively, because there is so much you can do with this. It doesn't just have to be sending emails. The sky's the limit with what you can do with something like this. All right, and so it dictates exactly what it sent to me so that I can see it on the screen as well. And I'm just going to pull up one of those emails so that you can kind of see what that looks like. There you go. So you can kind of see, pretty straightforward. And that's pretty much it. Very flexible, very powerful, and really not too bad to have to configure. So yeah, I will pass it back to Ryan. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate it. And we obviously gave the example of donors. It's very top of mind for a lot of organizations, pretty straightforward one. There's a lot that you can do there. The way I typically think about agents is you're giving instructions almost as if you would give instructions to a new employee or an intern. And they can take instructions, they can learn things, and you still have to give them the logic, though, to be able to do it. And then they have the autonomy to go make that happen on their own. That's similar to how agents work. At Tech Impact, we're doing it in a lot of different ways, helping partners with that. One that I'm excited about, Darnish is actually working on this right now, is helping to go tag restricted funds for an organization that has tons and tons of restricted funds available to them, and they need to go do something pretty similar here. Look at the allowable funds for each grant, go do the cross comparison of this line item can go with this particular grant and is allowable. And importantly, we're working to keep a human in the loop on that. It's not just the AI acting entirely autonomously. We need to keep the CFO of that organization in the middle so that they can say, like, yeah, this does actually make sense. And so that's certainly applicable to a lot of you, I'd imagine, who are also balancing restricted funds in some way. So we talked a lot about what's possible, but then the next question is, how can we make the possible possible? We're going to spend a lot of time on that on the December 2nd session, but just to bring things home, the really important way to do that is to be thoughtful about building out a data strategy for your organization. You should dream about the things that we just told you about earlier, the different opportunities for descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive analytics, and for generative AI. But none of that's possible without a strong data strategy that operates as the backbone for how you're thinking about data at your organization. There are a lot of different ways to go build a data strategy. Our organization does this quite a bit, and we actually operate a boot camp for nonprofits to think about how to use data more effectively. And the end goal of that is building a data strategy out. But we think about it in 6 key ways. They don't talk through those at a very high level. It's going to look very familiar to how a lot of strategies get made, but we think it's valuable to understand those nonetheless. Excuse me. Everything starts by understanding what your goals are. And so this starts before you ever think about data in the first place. Anytime that we're building a strategy out, we want to talk to leaders at the organization to understand what their goals are, what their mission is, make sure they have a logic model and a theory of change. And any of your goals should be aligned to those things. I think that's true of any type of strategy that you might be thinking about building. From there, we're going to use that information to identify the highest leverage opportunities and priorities that your organization might have and make sure that you have KPIs associated with those different things. You need to be able to measure the things that matter. And that's part of why a logic model becomes so important for you, so that you know how everything aligns there. From there, we have to know what you're working with. And a key place that I recommend most organizations start with is a data audit. Data audits, they build upon that knowledge that you get from organizational strategy by diving into the specific data sources that you have. Something that I find myself saying far more than I'm comfortable is garbage in, garbage out. Darnish actually mentioned this a little bit earlier, talking about some of the stuff in Fabric. If your data isn't of high quality, you are not going to be able to make strong predictions or measure in an appropriate way or build trust in your communities or do any of those things that we talk about. So by inventorying your data sources, literally going one by one, working with the subject matter at your team on something like that, you can get a good sense of, are there data quality issues? Are there data integration issues? Are there data governance issues? All these different key things that are going to be blockers for you building some of these more complex ideas. We're going to talk about a lot of those individual issues in the next session as well. And our goal here is to go understand the gaps. What is the gap between what a great, highly mature data organization looks like and where you stand right now? And how do we get through the difference between those things? Once we know that, it lets us select the right tools for the job. It starts with needs, and that's the point of the first couple steps there. It doesn't matter if you're picking the most complex tool you can or the most powerful tool that you can. If it doesn't fit where your organization is at, you're just going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time for no reason. Simple is better. Things that fit your needs are better. We need to make sure that we have and know what the requirements are for your organization. That includes cost. That includes a lot of other things as well. But we'll work with you, or you'll have an organization work with you to figure that out. And it's really important at this point to think about how the different tools you're working with integrate with each other. One of the great things about using Microsoft Azure tools is that they integrate with a ton of different external services that allow you to centralize your data in one place in a data warehouse there, which, like I said, we'll talk about. That lets us build a strong plan for you that you can build and pick based upon impact, feasibility, and you can work from there pretty well. Milestones, budgets, resourcing, including the literal resources on your team and what they bring to the table, matters quite a bit. Same idea. If you're picking something that is far beyond the capabilities of your team, you're not going to be successful with it. And so you need to pick and right size where you're at, which leads really well to the next bit. You should be thinking about how to build skills for your team and have a plan for that. Every person at your organization does not need to be a data scientist, but every person at your organization should be data literate and understand how their role fits into the broader data lifecycle of your organization. That helps you build this foster of data-driven decision making. So being thoughtful about the trainings that you need or how you're talking about and integrating data into the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis will make a really big difference here. And of course, the last step is to evaluate this. Data strategy is a never-ending life cycle that you have to constantly be thoughtful about. And so this is one way to do that. And it all repeats endlessly as you continue to identify gaps and areas of improvement. I mentioned the data life cycle, and that's something we're going to spend a lot more time talking about in the next session. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it right now, but the data lifecycle is exactly what it sounds like. It's how data that flows through your organization goes from generation to analytics, and a little bit more than that as well, like how you might actually get rid of data beyond that. It includes generation, storage, analytics. We really focus on those last two pieces, right? So Azure AI Foundry is a great example of analytics. Fabric, we really only focus on the analytics portion. And next time we'll talk more about the storage and extract, transform, and load functions it has as well. And in the next session, we'll spend a little bit more time building on this. We'll introduce Synapse that covers some similar concepts to Fabric, though in a slightly different way. And Purview, which is going to help give you governance over top of the whole system and let you think about it. So that's what's on deck for next time. In the meantime, as you're taking this into the holidays, at least if you're in the US, what you should be thinking about are how you can be using these different tools, these different types of analyses, from descriptive to prescriptive analytics, all the way up through generative AI, in order to solve problems at your organization. We use donors as the vehicle in which to explain it, but it could apply to operations, it could apply to programs, it could apply to so many different aspects of the work that you can do. Knowing what's possible is the key to figuring out what your data strategy plan should be. The first step in a strategy plan is to understand your goals. And if you don't know what those are, you're not going to be successful. And last, it's just worth highlighting again, Microsoft provides so many tools that let you do this work successfully. So explore those. Some of them are going to be the right fit for you, from analytics all the way to generative AI solutions. So with that said, are there any questions? I think we caught most of them in the chat as we were going, but certainly feel free to pass some along. And I haven't checked Q&A to see if there's anything in there. Nothing in there.
Nothing in Q&A. Yeah.
But happy to take some. We have 2 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is, to answer a couple real quick.
Yeah, it looks like, again, as you mentioned, we addressed the questions that were in there. There was a small number of them regarding accuracy, which Matt had addressed, and I kind of added my 2 cents into. So some very good commentary for those that were able to take a look at what was in there in chat. And that looked like that was really one of the main drivers. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add to that, Ryan.
I think you all did it. Kevin, I really appreciated your response there. Actually, I was looking at it, but you do get a feel for it. Just to go back and talk about the policy builder one that we looked at, we were really thoughtful when we were launching it. It was the first about 20 or so that we did. We made a point of having a human review it, so we felt really good about the outcome. And then eventually we gained a feel for it and an understanding of where the accuracies were lying. But just the general guidance I give folks anytime you're using AI is be vigilant about it. AIs are people pleasers. They were designed to be that way. They're really good at sounding true sometimes as well. So just as long as you have that like mental model in your head of I need to check this and be vigilant here, you're going to do well as far as I'm concerned. It's great. Any other questions or thoughts from folks?
One thing I'll add to that I thought was kind of interesting is recently I've been using AI to check AI. And if it thinks that it's not checking AI, it wants to please you by finding inaccuracies. And so it will check itself very aggressively. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. All right. Kevin, you want to take us home? You want me to talk through this?
Yeah, I can wrap it up from here. So again, thank you, Ryan, Matt, Darnish. Just a very good and informative session. Again, you can join us for part 2 of the session on the 2nd of December. Hopefully all of you that are still here with us have registered already. I'm sure that we're going to be providing additional information as part of follow-up for those that maybe haven't. To learn more about Microsoft AI and digital skill building, we have the following resource at page.techsoup.org/digital-skills-center. And then any questions about Microsoft solutions, you can email us at reachus@techsoup.org. If you have any questions for the Tech Impact team, which hopefully you do, because I think I even have some based on this session, you can email them at training@techimpact.org. So with that, again, a very, very huge thank you to Ryan, Matt, and Darnish. This is awesome. There was a trailing question that came in. I did catch that, so I'm glad that you got that in there regarding registration. The ability to view registration will get you access to the recording. So we understand that we've all, I'm sure, been in that scenario where we have 1,000 things that we're committed to. So the survey, again, also is in the chat. We really appreciate the feedback and your time today and for joining us. So with that, I will wish everybody a good evening, afternoon, and morning. And for those that are recognizing the Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S., a very happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.